Welcome. It's nice to see so many here. Tom was afraid there wouldn't be anyone here tonight. So you can see there's an interest in our heritage, in the aluminum heritage of the town. I'm working on a newsletter, and I went back and I counted how many people have attended seminars or dinners or banquets. And in September and October, we have had close to 300 people in this building, plus 120 eighth graders. So we have had a very busy autumn, and add this group tonight, so we're a swinging place. Our speaker tonight needs no introduction. He's our treasurer who keeps every one of us in line and knows exactly to the penny how much money we have. So Tom, the floor is yours. And have and don't have, yes.
I hope it's going to be a little fun night tonight. We're going to be reviewing and give an overview of the hammered aluminum industry in the Grove City area. But it has some history behind it. We had to get here in time and then go beyond that. As a help in tonight's program, I have a handout that lists the various individuals, and to spread these around, and we'll be referring to it throughout the presentation. And then there's what else will you see to it that history gets handed, and handed out.
Are those the same with that? What do you got? Yeah.
There's just two. There's the one that has the family tree, and the other one has the pictures. He's the owner.
Well, where is he?
In some ways, you may think of the aluminum in this community as the America's finest aluminum, finest hand wrought. Many people don't know what the term hand wrought means, but it's hand hammered. Hammered is kind of a generic term. Hand wrought is the sophisticated term. And we're going to explore what took place in Grove City from 1992 to the present in one sense, but it's actually just going to be to the 50s, because you can't cover everything, and the real focus of what was going on started in 1932, and that, I'm sure this is going to work for me. That situation came about because Wendell August, who you're really all familiar with in some shape or form, came to Grove City about that time. So we're going to explore this whole concept of hand-wrought aluminum and the people that grew out of it. Now, I can't cover everybody because there's a lot of people that got involved in the hammered aluminum industry. What we're going to focus on are people who took this industry and ran with it. In other words, they said, I'm going to make a business out of it, and then hired other people. And they had to have a lot of good craftsmen. But we're not going to focus just on those craftsmen. We're going to focus on the people who started businesses and worked with the aluminum and utilized the skills and talents of other people to accomplish the task of creating a business and making a living, giving people employment, and making a nice product, and a particularly nice product. look around the room here, you can see lots of aluminum, lots of Window August, and there's some Armour Aluminum, some anodized aluminum. In the cabinets over there are aluminum objects. And we're going to be discussing how those came about. And our goal tonight is kind of have a better understanding of this period of time, and actually the period from the late 1880s up to 1950s, and get a glimpse of this rise of this hammered aluminum business, and then discuss the artisans that developed this hand-wrought aluminum business. I also have up there the word fall, because the hammered aluminum business blossomed, it did well, and virtually went away. But the people of Grove City always thought Window August was around all the time, so it was always hammered aluminum. And that, it's true. But in the rest of the country, virtually the hammered aluminum industry went away. I mean, people quit doing it, and there's reasons for that. And we'll look at some of these things that happened. So here's the family tree. You have a copy before you, and so in order to understand it as a focus of Alcoa, American Aluminum Company of America, and from that spawned this hammered aluminum business in its various forms and shapes. And we'll be discussing each one of those people that are on this family tree. So this all comes from personal interviews that I've had, of course, with my father, Arthur Armour. Kind of interacted with him a lot over hammered aluminum because of his business and what we were going to do with it after he quit doing it. And I've had interviews with Paul Rossi and James DePonso, Leighton Sheasley, Theodore Huber. Visited them in the years after they quit their business. And as I traveled around the country for various reasons, we found ourselves in Florida, and California, and up in Chautauqua, and we looked these people up. So they were, I met them while they were still living, and right now none of them were living. Then it's important to note that there are people who have done considerable research. I got this stack of books over here, and this is a lot of information about the people that developed the hammered aluminum industry. And Bonnie Campbell and William Freeman, they wrote the book that focuses on Window August, because it's really the flagship, and anything you ever wanted to know about the history of hammered aluminum is in here in relationship to Window August. About all the sidearms, the Arthur Armour, the Huber, the Palmer Smith, I think certain aspects of that aren't in here because the focus of this book was Window August. But it mentions those people and gives them credit, and I'll be referring and have copies from that book. Then there's Dennis Weidenauer, and Dennis is a person who became extremely interested in hammered aluminum, and he began doing, wherever they went here, a number of these monographs, and here's one that's on Finley and Dietz, these monographs that kind of tell the story of those people and then gives examples. So if you want to search out more information, there is a lot of information to look at, and written information is very important. And Danny Woodard, she kind of began the interest in collecting hammered aluminum, and she put together a book of just pictures, basically, of all kinds of different makers. And so she kind of sparked the interest. And then there's Doug Sutherland, who has an interest particularly in Jim DePonso. And then there's many other people that have done various and sundry research work. Now these are examples of those monographs that are there, and it's written information in the book. Now, we want to look at some of the aspects here related to aluminum. And many people don't realize that aluminum is just a little, in terms of a useful metal that's available to use, a little over 100 years ago. Before that, they couldn't use aluminum because there wasn't enough of it. They didn't know how to get the bauxite into a metal, and it took a special process to do that. That there were people interested in aluminum, like Napoleon, and there was continued interest in the late 1800s of how to transform the ore into a metal that you could use. And Charles Hall was the person in this country who was in Oberlin College at the time. His professor said, the person that figures that out, of how to get aluminum into the metal you can use, will become a millionaire. And he leaned over to his classmate and said, I'm going to do that. And guess what? At Oberlin College, his professor encouraged him. He worked on that project. And there's a plaque to kind of emphasize that along with Charles Hall and Frank Jewett, the professor, they figured out a way to do that. This is his house, and it's interesting to go to these places. Now, this isn't a picture out of a magazine, that's a picture off my camera. And we went there, and it was February 23rd, 1886. The electrolytic process of making aluminum. And he did it in the back of his house, in that garage. He figured out how to do it. And so he's kind of become famous for that. This is kind of dramatic example of the process. I'm not going to explain it. He had some competition. In France, this gentleman was doing the same thing, and there was a conflict over the patent. But in this country, Hall got the patent. This is a color presentation, but it takes a lot of electricity. A lot of electricity. 220K amps. That's a lot of electricity. And where do we have electricity in this neck of the woods? Neck of the woods meaning within 300 miles. Where? Tell me where you can get electricity. Where do they make electricity in this part of the country? You know, if you didn't have coal furnaces, where did you get electricity? There's something up north, around Buffalo, a little further. Niagara Falls. Lots and lots of electricity. Pittsburgh is where they developed Alcoa. And they began refining the aluminum. That this box, which I'll explain a little bit later, contains the crown jewels. The crown jewels are the first goblets of aluminum that came as a result of the process. And so they have them in a box, and a particular person made that box. And the price of aluminum back in 1852, and you can't see it too clearly, but it's $545 per ounce, or pound it was, pound. And by the time it was running, this is 1887, 35 cents. What a big difference. Now, Alcoa was the major developer, but in the midst of all this came the Great Depression. What happened in 1929? The stock market crash. Everything fell apart in this country. We think we have it bad now, it was really bad then. And in Grove City, which is in the midst of this depression, there's E.J. Fithian, who was very instrumental in the Bessemer Engine Company. This is back around the turn of the century, 1907, 13. They were making Bessemer engines, and then he was interested in this type of thing, getting Grove City going. And he was also a banker. And in the midst of that time, he wanted to remodel his bank, and he started looking around, and he had some contacts with people, and this aluminum stuff was starting to come into vogue. And he contacted Wendell August to do his bank, make railings, bank tables, and Wendell August, meanwhile, is up in Brockway, Pennsylvania. How many know where Brockway is? East of here. And he was in significant financial trouble. He was a kind of a coal broker, and the coal wasn't selling in the Depression, but he found that he could run a blacksmith shop, as he could make some money with blacksmithing, but that turned sour. But then he started exploring aluminum and explored this new metal and began using forging techniques on this metal, and put it in the fire and it disintegrated. Because you can't do the same thing with aluminum you can with steel to forge it. You work it more like it's cooler than real hot. So he explored it, and he was working with that. He experimented with it. He made various architectural objects, and then he received a contract to make gates and an elevator door at the New Kensington Research Center for Alcoa. Alcoa was doing lots of research with aluminum, expanding its use, and they built this research center to develop all the various uses of aluminum and the various alloys. And so he got the job to build these gates and also the elevator doors. And then he got into launching a giftware business, because they used giftware and made giftware out of some of the examples of the doors. So here's the gates, close up. Each one of these items up here was made out of aluminum, and then they put it together with straps and welded. That's the prototype. And these are the elevator doors, the big doors. If you were standing there, you'd be this high. I went to see them with my father, because some people think it's the gates that prompted the industry. It was actually these doors that promoted the giftware business, because the doors had designs on them, and these designs, they took some of it and made it into a tray. The thing about this, you look close and you can see there's no pattern in each of these places, because they cut out the metal and then pounded it down in the hole. But later, they figured out that you could do it a little differently. This is real close up. You see there's no pattern on this. There's a pattern overall, but not on that. That's because there was nothing that they pounded it against. But they figured out how to make a tray like this. Is the original tray. It was given to Kaufman, not the Kaufmans, but was given to the board of directors of Alcoa. And Kaufman saw it, and he liked it, and he wanted lots more. And this is the type of thing you can do with aluminum for architectural use. And then there was this use with giftware. Now this is very crude, and there's the piece. Now this piece is extremely crude. This is Natal. Natal, in his night dream, thought this up. He personally told me that. So it's not a hearsay. It was interesting that this piece, which he gave my father, I found in a drawer in the shop when I was cleaning things up, that it has NLR, Natal Rossi, and he actually told my father that I don't know if I should believe it, that's what he did on the first time. He made this, carved in his steel, he put the metal on, you pounded on the back, you got the impression. That process is called repoussé, pounding on the back to get an impression on the front. So this one has no trademark on the back. This one has window August. This one I actually got at a flea market, so it was on the market. Now this one was probably something personal he made, and he gave it to my father. Anyway, they started making different types of designs, and Fithian told Window August that maybe it'd be a good idea for you to move to Grove City. I'll build your building, and you can have your business here. So 1932 marks the beginning of the Grove City industry for aluminum. And this book documents 75 years of artistry in metal, written by Bonnie Campbell. A very excellent book. This diagram shows the Brockway's out here and Grove City's over here. And so they moved to Grove City. And he brought with him blacksmiths and workers, about 8 of them came to Grove City, and he hired people from Grove City, and my father was one of them. He was more a designer because he was educated in architecture, design work, art, and Window August business was really expanding at that time because of the concept of depression silver. Aluminum looks like silver, and people didn't have much money, but they could buy aluminum because it was cheap. And so there was a market for this at that time. And because it was new metal, it looked like silver, it was easy to form, and you could decorate it with the repoussé process, and it was a handcraft. And at this time was the development of the American arts and craft movement. So there was interest in it. This is a publication and a display that was put together in New York City that had a focus on 1920 to 1945 for the craft and the machine age, because things were changing rapidly in the country and over the world in many ways, because things were becoming more industrial and mechanical. And another publication that just recently came out talks about a modern world. And it's a catalog from Yale University, and in that book they took their collection and then talked about how the development of the arts. And within that book I have a piece of my father's aluminum because it was in their collection. Now we're going to focus on the different people other than Window August, although he's important and people came from there, and you'll see that as we go through that. So the first one is my father, Arthur Armour, and as time went on, we found out he would tell me I was the right person at the right place at the right time. Because he had talent, the skill, and he was in Grove City when August was here. He went to work for him, and he learned about hammered aluminum, that it didn't work out, and they laid him off because there was a conflict with the designer, James McCausland. And this just gives a quick summary that he was born in Crawford County and lived in the Conneaut Lake area. My grandfather, T.F., he did lots of different things, and he actually operated a grocery store here in town. And he traveled to California. My father graduated in '26 from Grove City High School, and then he attended Grove City College and went to Carnegie Architectural School, and he graduated, and there's no jobs, you know, like today. People go to college and no job after they graduate. So he decided to join Window August, but he was laid off, that he started his own business, and before he started his own business, here's some of the things he designed at Window August, these types of items. he was into the Art Deco, arts and craft movement. A lot of people in this area, what are you talking about? But he would go and do research and get examples and execute them with a die. But in the spring of '33, there was a design conflict. He was laid off. So he did his own thing. He designed a tray, cut the die himself, and then he started his own business. And this shop exists today just up the street. Of course, he got married, and my mother was very influential in the business side of it. What do you want me to do, Marcia?
You skipped over the picture. It's nice to look at the picture.
You want to see the picture?
Yeah, it's nice to look at the picture. You went so fast.
There we go.
Oh, that's great.
So, it was very important, and also she had interaction with several people that we'll talk about in a little bit. Stanley Brussels was a salesman out of Chicago. You couldn't do this business unless you had a market, and you had to be able to market the product. And in my discussion, you'll find that Homer Smith was the marketer for Window August. He put Window August on the map because he knew how to sell things and he had the experience, and we'll talk about him in a minute. My father cut a number of different designs and implemented them and sold his product, and this is kind of the advertising blitz to interest somebody in hammered aluminum. So the market was good. He had a good salesperson. The stuff was valued by the people in these cities: New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. That's where he sold. People here didn't buy it very much, many, and it was all shipped out. So my father had a trademark, Arthur Armour with the A. He had some other trademarks that he used for special type of work he did for companies. And he did write up a explanation of why aluminum was an up-and-coming metal. And this is one of his world map trays. There's one down in the display case that got a lot of attention, and he made many of those trays of the world map. At the same time, Alcoa developed their own product. So you have to have this in context. Up here in Grove City, my father broke off from Window August, but Kensington at pretty much the same time was developing its own product, and that's Kensington ware. And it was very Art Deco-ish, and it did a flourishing business for Alcoa. It used a little different alloy of aluminum, so it made it hard and didn't scratch as easily and didn't tarnish as much. It was somewhat similar to anodizing, but it actually was the metal was different. It was their own brand of metal. So this is the type of products that they would produce: big plates with brass, and their trademark. This little trademark is a stag. That's Kensington's trademark. It came to be an interesting place in our life that I'll mention later. And their product emphasized the metal and the design and their trademark, and they went to a trade show. Remember 2 weeks ago, if you were here, Will Connect said that they went to a trade show and had their purses and things, and they had all this attention. 4,000 buyers were at this one. So the same thing is kind of repeating itself a little bit. Oh, now, we're gonna look at Palmer, Arthur Palmer, and see on your sheets there that he had a business from 1935 to 42, but he worked with Window August. Around 1932, he came in contact with Window August, and Window August hired him to be his salesman. And he had been, in a 10-year period, he'd been working in New York City in the mercantile businesses and exposed to all the things that were going on in the city and the type of things that people were buying. And he liked this aluminum, and he went to work for Window August, and he was selling it, and he really sold it well. He made more money than Window August with that 20% commission. And Window August says, my employees don't make more money than me, so you get 15%. Palmer said, fine. He started his own business. But he started his own business. He was in a situation where Arthur Armour had already started, and Window August was in the process of suing Arthur Armour on patent infringement. Window August had applied for a patent, and this patent was granted the Repoussé process, but there was tremendous outroar because this Repoussé process, pounding on the back and the pressure on the front, goes way back in antiquity. You can't patent this. So that was withdrawn, but they did patent the concept of actually, if there was a really deep design, you pound on the back and push it down better. They got some fuzzy patent, but that patent didn't go, any infringement that never happened. But Palmer was not interested in rocking the boat, and he had some other ideas. So he started a little different process. And he developed a process by he would pound on the front, this design. And here's a really good example. He would pound on the front and make these things on flat metal. Then they'd form the bowl, and then they would put a punch and push and make it three-dimensional, even more three-dimensional. And so how'd they do that? Well, I have come in contact with Jeff Parker, who has a whole box of chisels. And these chisels are used to find one up here that has like this U shape. So if you wanted to make a U shape, you'd put it on there and hit it. And hit it, and hit it, and hit it, and hit it, and hit it. I had a template that they put down so you could just follow it. So every one of these was individually put on. Have various designs. Here's the type of ivy. But before he got into this, he first did a little bit of Repoussé, and I'm going to show you a couple pictures of Repoussé things, but his name is Arthur Jesse Palmer, and he really put Window August on the map, but then he started his own business, and he knew the market, and he had this 20% commission, which was too much for Window August to pay. So he left, and he switched from Repoussé to chisels, which I just showed you, because he was concerned about that impingement on the patent. And Palmer was an idea person. He didn't do this work. He didn't get dirty. He said, I want this done. So here's the kind of things he'd come up with. You know, I said, well, I want somebody to make this for me. I want to sell it. And so he would do that. He'd have the ideas. And this is the first, the Repoussé process. And that is the die was cut, and this is the product from it. Here's some more dies, and it turns out that my father and Palmer had a little bit of a relationship over time. He sold my father's products in the 50s and the 60s, and when he closed his business in 42, my father acquired these dies, and after my father died, I found these in the shop, these dies. And here's an example of the chisels and how you pound on them. You can make this wheat pattern that was on trays. There's the wheat pattern. I reproduced that using chisels, and that's how he did it. So he really developed these other methods.
Did he make the chisels?
He had somebody make them. They were welded and formed, and the blacksmith making. So here's some of the diagrams of the patterns that he would make, repetitive patterns. And here's pictures of the patterns that were in his catalog. This is his catalog, and you can begin to see how he would make kind of exotic type stuff. So those exotic things took a lot of work to make. There's one of his fancy bowls, pretty much using this idea, but having these seahorses type things, some type of representation of fish of some sorts, and he just liked elegant things. So he was doing this business, and he did it up till 1942. And the thing that's hanging over everybody, which you'll see, is World War II. And that had a great influence on our country, and also aluminum, because everybody stopped at that point. Couldn't make it, couldn't get the metal. So at the same time, this is going on in Wendell, August, you have these two people, Pizzoni and Rossi. Pizzoni was a blacksmith, old-time blacksmith. He came from Italy, as did Rossi. They did blacksmithing. Pizzoni was older, he did blacksmithing, he did blacksmithing, he did blacksmithing. This aluminum stuff, maybe, but they came to Grove City from Brockway, and Pizzoni, he didn't like it particularly. He just wanted to go back. So he went back to Brockway and took Rossi with him. But Rossi was torn between, because he was younger, should he go with the industry that was going faster, being productive, or stay up in Brockway. And eventually, Natal Rossi came back to Wendell, August. Pizzoni continued to make his product, and his product was called HC. And that's a picture of Pizzoni. This is Natal. These are pictures out of the book that Monty Campbell wrote. And it's a chapter in the aluminum industry. And again, here's Natal, and he's holding this little plate, which I went and talked with him, and he held it for me so I could take his picture. Then you understand that Rossi was a craftsman, and he did mostly architectural work, maybe the repoussé, various things, but he didn't necessarily have a lot of design talent, but he could work really hard, and he made a lot of nice things, and he stuck with Wendell August in that capacity as a workman. So he knew the trade very well. Meanwhile, Arthur Armour is over here, and people are working for Arthur Armour, and there's Denneker, DePonso, Finley, Sheasley, and Huber. Denneker worked for Wendell August. He was from Grove City, and started working for Wendell August, and moved over to Arthur Armour. DePonso came from Brockway and moved to Arthur Armour. Finley was a local person, and this Dietz person was somebody that worked for Cooper Bessemer and cut dies. Beasley was kind of a local person. He went to Grove City College, heard about my father, as did, you'll hear about Hubert. And Sheasley came and knocked on my father's door and got a job. So he worked with him, worked with my father for a short time, really only about a year and a half. He had some health problems. He was allergic to turpentine. And secondly, he had a very bad accident in which his mother was killed. He survived the accident, but he decided to move to Pittsburgh and go to a seminary down there, become a minister. While there, he decided not to be a minister. And then he said, I know how to do this aluminum stuff because I work for Arthur Armour. And he started a business down in Pittsburgh. And he kind of stopped and started. Activity like the seminary, he went to seminary and he stopped and he started the business in 1938. And this was down in Pittsburgh. He personally told me that the reason he started the business was to help his brother, who didn't have a job. I said, well, let's do this business. He started the business and his brother didn't like doing it, so Sheasley kept doing it. And he was able to stay in business until 41, but that's when the war came along. He had to stop. And after the war, he started up again, but when he started up, he came to Grove City. And one of those people on that big people picture, Rainey, Paul Rainey, down in the left-hand corner, the right-hand corner. Paul Rainey was working for my father, but he was a little bit of a rebel rouser, and actually also went to the same church. But he teamed up with Sheasley, and Sheasley stored his stuff during the war in his basement, and then after the war they started a business in Slippery Rock. And Sheasley's business really went quite well, and he made some nice products. I'll put one here for you. He could cut some of his dies. He had some talent that way. Here's one of them. And he had a nice line of products that he had. And he moved to Slippery Rock. While I was up here, then he purchased some dies, which we haven't talked about Wes Finley yet, because Wes Finley started the business after Sheasley, and he bought some other aluminum, but he acquired some other things and dies that he then ended production in 1950. And the reason he stopped is what was happening to the aluminum industry. He went to a wedding, and there were 27 aluminum gifts for a bride. They said they're getting overloaded. I don't think this is going to last. So he started making furniture for churches. But then he studied more and became an Episcopal minister, and he was the minister of the Episcopal Church in Hermitage for a long time. But then he sold out his equipment eventually to DePonso. And if you get the flow of things, I'm doing this chronological when they started their business. So that's why we're interfacing with some people I haven't talked about yet. Now, back up just a little bit, there's Hall, DeLoss and Hall. It's not certain exactly the connection, but they dovetail into Sheasley and DePonso. And he was over in Emlenton, and there was a Robert Hall down in Pittsburgh, Carnegie. He cut dies for DeLoss. And then there's one die, it's called the Coach and Four, and three people had it. DeLoss, Sheasley, and DePonso. And I have an example on all three marks. And I'll get those for you in a minute. And at this point, also, Robert Hall died in 1949, and then the dyes were sold to Sheasley after World War II. Jim DePonso marries Robert Hall's widow, because Robert Hall died of a gunshot wound in '49. This is a catalog picture or advertisement of the loss. Let me see if I can find real quick here. These trays. I'm going to show you the best one because you can see it because it has color on it. This is the Coach of 4. And it was actually Sheasley's, but this is the first one. And it has the best quality cut. I don't have it finished. This it has Delos written on the back. Then you have Sheasley, and then it progresses to, this is a DePonso tray. It's all the same design, but it's because of the transfer of ownership of these, the dyes from which they made these products. So I pushed the wrong buttons on there. So that's kind of the input of the loss, and he didn't last very long. And it's very hard to find out information about the loss when it was in Emmleton. Now the next individual is Huber, Ted Huber. And he had a business from 1942 to into the 1990s or 80s, somewhere in there, but he didn't start his business right away. He just worked for my father. And in about 37, he became a teacher. He was interested in teaching. And he also had some health problems and allergies. He went to Uniontown. Then he went to the University of Pittsburgh and received a master's in industrial arts. And he worked with aluminum and other metals. He liked working with that. And he was actually writing a manual for how to use metal, how to make boxes and handles and trays and all this. Never got published in Lippincott because he didn't finish it, and he moved to California. And because he had these health problems, more allergy type things, and in California he started his business. This is a picture out of the manual that he was developing. You can see him working, twisting wires, aluminum wires to make handles. And then he went to California, and there he opened his own aluminum business, but he kept it kind of shiny. He didn't put color on it, and used just mainly hammer marks and wire handles. Did very little repoussé, and while he was there, his nephew sold him an orchid business, which after several years of hard work flourished. And he had a very good business, but he also continued doing aluminum work, and he had it in his showroom and sold aluminum out of California. This is in '95, Ted Huber and Llewellyn. Now the thing about Llewellyn was she worked for my dad while he worked for my father, and she babysat. Well, she said she babysat me, but I wasn't born yet. He was my brother that she babysat. We visited him out in Carlsbad, California, and But she was a very talkative person, and he was, well, skilled in what he did, and these are some of the things that he made. And you can't see this one. This is a Conestoga wagon, which had some place in his life because his family moved to California when he was not California, Colorado when he was very young, and they didn't like it in Colorado. They came back to St. Louis in a Conestoga wagon. And the thing about the Conestoga wagon, he was in a baby carriage in the back of the Conestoga wagon. They went up a hill, he rolled out the back. Half a day later, they realized he wasn't there. So they went back and found him. The only damage was he was crying. Anyway, he had really kind of a successful business connected to this orchids and aluminum business. And there's his trademarks of California made, and when he was pretty much retired out of the orchid business, he used this trademark. Now, we move on to Finley, and you see the dates. He started the business in 1945, but he worked for my father prior to that, prior to the war, and at that time, towards the end of the 30s, other businesses were starting. One of them was Everlast, and Everlast sent letters to people that worked in this area, residents, and tried to entice them to come to New York to work for Everlast. DePonso didn't go. Finley did. He went because they were offering him $5,000 to come work for him. And he went, he didn't like it, came back and wanted his job back, and my father fired him. He said, no, you don't come back. I think he gave some of the techniques and stuff to him. He just didn't want it. So, of course, then the war came. People couldn't do it, but he started up a business in Stoneboro in 1945. It only lasted a short time, and he wasn't very good at it. It's one of the things that I wanted to point out is just because you did hammer and aluminum and cut some dies didn't mean it was good. It was your attempt, you worked hard at it, but the quality of the designs and the design skills were lacking in many people that tried to do this. And the thing that distinguished in terms of my father's work is that he put into the design skill. And you can see some of the designs up here. And in that day and age, they usually were kind of plain, but they had nice outlines, and they had some appeal to them. They kind of last forever. But if you just chisel out a little flower, doesn't mean it's nice. But many people say, oh, that's a piece of hammered aluminum, that's nice. You know, it's kind of like, is this nice? No, it was the road to something greater. And so Finley didn't do too well, and he had Dietz cut some of his dies. And Dietz worked for Cooper Bessemer also, and they made some products. There isn't too many of them, but one of the things they did was they duplicated other people. And so this is a sailboat and flying geese. These were made off of a Finley die, but they're copies of Arthur Armour. The virtual, very obvious. The only thing they did different is they turned them backwards. Oops. They turned them backwards, you know, because you would draw it off the plate. This is another Finley product, and it has some butterflies on it, which was an attempt to copy the butterfly that was on my father's butterfly. I don't know if you
It's
have
right
it.
there up top.
Yeah, it's up there. It didn't fly too well. But these impressions came from DePonso. He made them for me because DePonso eventually acquired Finley's dyes. So, you see, he worked for my father. He was offered the $5,000, but he came back, and Armour didn't go along with that, laid him off, said, no, you can't work here. And after the war, he started up in Stoneborough. And Beats cut his dyes, didn't make very many. Business didn't last too long. And when he closed down, he sold his dyes to DePonso. DePonso bought the dyes and some table, requisite tables. But Dietz continued to do some dye cutting, and he made some products, mostly for friends. And if you happen to find one of these pieces of aluminum and it has a D on the back with 3 birds, that would be from Dietz. And he had died early at age 43. Now we'll look at DePonso, because DePonso has a heritage that his son is still in production of items. And DePonso, he really did some quality type work, and he had joined Arthur Armour in '34, and then after the war he started his own business. He purchased some equipment and dyes from Finley, and by 1950 he realized that aluminum wasn't going to be something he wanted to continue. And here again, I've emphasized that the people that started businesses usually were the person that produced it, except for Palmer. Palmer didn't produce it, he had his ideas. But these other people were craftsmen, and they started their business on the idea of craft work, so they were heavily involved in doing the craft. They worked day in, day out. My father's standpoint was he was a designer. He could do the craft. He had the skill to do the craft, but he hired other people to do all the work. And so the people that were crafters may not have had a product that was of high quality, but they made a product and made a living. And so he became a teacher in special education. He moved to Chautauqua, but he continued making aluminum in his garage. But in the process, after Robert Hall died, DePonso had gotten a divorce, and then he married Florence Hall and got some things that came along with the aluminum business. Now these are interesting pictures. I found them in the society here, and they're pictures from Jimmy in the workshop. That's Jimmy DePonso. He's kind of fuzzy here, but you can see him up there. And this is a little closer up. There he is, holding the hammer. This is up in Chautauqua. And I went to visit him with my father back in the late 90s, and got to visit with him, talk with him, and I wanted to see the dyes. And those are the dyes that were cut by Dietz, who Finley used to produce products which DePonso purchased the dyes with and made products from down the road. So it's kind of intertwined. And you can see the up above, these are the imprint, and they look like, but if you look at the real McCoy, they aren't the same. So that was DePonso. I'll show you a couple other pieces from DePonso. The one of the coaches for, that was fairly typical of, and he adapted an extrusion for a handle, and the shapes and things were pretty much what he learned about when he worked for Wendell August and my father. Henniger is the next one. In terms of Henniger, he worked for Wendell August and then came to my father's in about 1934. And then after the war, he started doing business in his basement and made various and sundry smaller products. That typical product is pretty much the type of tray my father made, the same kind of handles, same shape, same size. But in terms of artistic quality, if you want to be critical in terms of the quality, this didn't have the quality. You know, you say, well, that's really nice. What is? Yet at the same time, there's no style to the ducks. They're ducks or geese. You can tell that, but it's.
Now, you might think that he might be a little slanted in his opinion, but you can decide for yourself. You can compare the two.
But there's, it just, and I have a quality engraver sitting in the room known as Steve Adams. He might be able to give some insight into this. You may not want to, but you don't have to, Steve. Any thoughts?
From here, I can't really tell. But design-wise, I can tell right away that your father's is much better, of course.
Of course, the thing is, what is better? And there's
It's crude.
characteristics of artistic design, and maybe Lillian can tell us what that is. She doesn't want to put on the spot. Yeah. So there's just a different.
What's wrong with it, Steve?
It's crude.
Crude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something someone would do if they were just starting out. And I don't know at what point that was done, but someone could probably do that with some kind of